guys, it's Courtney. I just wanted to touch base with you and say I'm so sorry I canceled class on Monday night. It turns out the weather was fine, but I'd rather be safe than sorry. So I hope you guys feel the same way. So I hope that this video kind of can bridge the gap of what you read in the textbook and what the assignments that are going to be posted on the blog, all of that stuff kind of meshed together. I think that you're going to be able to get most of what we would have gotten in the classroom conversation, other than the fact that we're not going to be able to visit together. But let's just kind of run through some of the notes that I've made from the chapter. I thought this chapter was very interesting, especially for me personally, because I've just gotten back from Disney World. And that whole cultural aspect of Disney World really is a global community. I met folks from all across the globe. Tried to visit with a few of them that did not speak English. Everything from Italian to Mandarin, Spanish, Portuguese, it was all there. And so it was a really interesting opportunity. So forgive me, I've got my notes here, and I apologize if you see those, but I'm going to try to just hit the highlights. So one of the first things that we need to talk about are some definitions, and there are some very specific definitions when it comes to visiting about culture. So your textbook basically says that culture is a lifestyle that a group of people develop. Each and every one of you watching this video have a lifestyle, and that, in essence, is your culture. And that's passed down from generation to generation. So if you were raised on the East Coast, you might have a very different culture than someone who was raised here in the Texas Panhandle. And someone in the Texas Panhandle may have a very different culture than someone who was raised, let's say in the Permian Basin or in the Metroplex. It's different, but not completely different. One of the examples that I like to use when we talk about this is the various words that we use for having a soft drink. In our part of the world, we say, hey, Bob, are you going to the store? Yeah. Well, could you get me a Coke? And Bob's like, yeah, I can get you a Coke. What kind do you want? Well, I'd like a Dr. Pepper. That doesn't make any sense, right? But to us, it makes complete sense, because when you ask for a Coke, it doesn't necessarily mean you're asking for a Coca-Cola. It means that you're asking for a soft drink. You go a little further north, maybe to Iowa, North Dakota, South Dakota, Minnesota, somewhere around in there, Minnesota, you're going to experience the word pop. Oh, you want a pop? Yeah? I do a bad accent. But they ask for a pop. Other places across the country, they ask for a soda, they ask for various different things. That's an example of how our culture is defined. Where did I learn how to ask for a Coke and really mean a Dr. Pepper? Well, my mom taught it to me. And who taught it to her? Well, her mom taught it to her. So it's a cultural thing. Big thing. Got to remember this. Culture is not genetic. You are not born into saying Coke versus pop. You were culturally taught to say one or the other. So that's important. So that gives us a great opportunity, because if culture is learned, then we can change our culture. Our culture can morph based on what we want it to be. So let's say that you're the first person in your family to go to college. You, in essence, are changing the culture of your family tree. Pretty cool, huh? Let's say that you're the first person in your family to ride a motorcycle. Well, you very well may change that lineage of your tree. You're the first person who's a veteran. You've served in our military. Well, you may be creating a lineage of service in the armed forces. So we can create that culture. But my hair color, my facial features, those things are all genetically based, meaning it comes off of our DNA. Y'all know what DNA is, right? Okay, we're going to go with you. Okay, so basically culture is all of the values and beliefs, our religion, all of those things are amalgamated into the idea of culture. We're talking arts, we're talking music, we're talking our laws, and how we communicate with one another. So, one of the things I experienced this week when I was in Disney is different cultures think it's okay to communicate one way, and we communicate a different way. I am a very outspoken individual. I think we should say hello to each other. I think we should all help each other. And I really believe that. I spoke to some folks who were working in the parks, and you would think Disney would be the happiest place on earth. Well, for these folks, it wasn't. You tried to make small talk with them because I'm very comfortable with that. They would have rather said a million different explicatives to me than say hello. And to me, that was offensive. And so I had to just stop and think. I'm like, this must be a learned culture. This must be something within this area that they are from or the work environment where they don't respond that way. So that was a very interesting thing for me. Also, when you watch family groups in large areas where you have the chance to just kind of do some people watching, it's dynamic. People really just kind of they behave in certain ways, and they have certain ways of working with each other that look different than how you and I might work with each other. For example, I talked to a woman very briefly because my Espanol is muy mal, and she was from Venezuela. And to watch her with her children, the way she nurtured them was different than the way I nurtured my children, but the essence of it was still the same. But she just did it in a different way than I did. I watched an Asian couple who were speaking, I believe it was Mandarin, while we were riding the bus back and forth between parks. And the way they communicated with each other was vastly different than the way I communicate with my husband. So just know that that's all based on our cultural values. Okay? Okay, so one of the things I think is funny is this is Black History Month, and so we're being very exposed this month to all sorts of wonderful things that the African Americans in our country have given. Sojourner Truth and all these wonderful things. Martin Luther King, Rosa Parks. All these people have contributed to our national culture. But a lot of us who are not familiar with the African American culture assume that there's some very basic things that all African Americans like, right? So fried chicken and watermelon, right? How rude. I have a story I can share with you guys later about that, but that is us being blind to another culture. And but we do the same thing with us. There's actually a website with us being Caucasian white culture. There's actually a website. It's a blog called Stuff White People Like, and it goes through and it has this list of and they're all blog posts. It's not just a list that someone's typed. It's like individual blog posts about things that white people like. And I went through it and I was like, I don't like that. That's not me. Oh wait, maybe that one is me. Okay, I do like that. And I could just go through the list, and I was realizing, I'm like, this is a really good example of culture and how it might be stereotypically white culture. And I think that's what we oftentimes do to Asians. We often do that to Hispanics. We do that to African Americans. You name it. You name the ethnic group, and we're going to put some cultural values with it. So be aware that that happens, but know that that can enhance your communication. When you're talking to an Asian person, do you naturally assume that they're smart? Do you naturally assume that they are very linear and functional that way? Or do you make the allowance for that they're an individual and you don't know how long they've been in America? You don't know if they've just come to America. You have no idea if they speak English. You have no idea if they're all Asian, if they are like grandma once upon a time was Asian and they kind of have some Asian features. You just don't know. So in our communication, we need to just be mindful that we shouldn't prejudge people based on how they look. So just a good thing. And to pick on whiteys for just a little bit longer, just because I'm from the South, and I happen to live in Texas does not mean that I wear big hair. I guess maybe I could, but I just don't wear big hair. But we know stereotypically that we assume women from our part of the region, we have great big hair. So, not necessarily truthful. And I bet we can make the assumption that every man in the room, so to speak, the virtual room, has a gun and knows how to fire a gun and knows how to clean a gun and probably knows how to make their own ammunition. And we could even go so far as to say all the women in the room probably can do the same thing too, except their revolvers are pink. That's just not the truth. Some in the room may fit that description, but it's not all of us. So our cultures are very different. We need to talk about, because this is very heavy laden in definitions. So we also need to talk about sex. And like when you're filling out a job application or when you're filling out something that's more formal, it's going to ask you your sex. And sex is driven completely by your genetics. You're either given an XY chromosome or an XX chromosome. XY means you're male, XX means you're female. End of story. But that is genetically driven. Okay? But gender, when we talk about your gender, that means what assignment has culture put on your sex. And so this is where it gets a little confusing when we start talking about, well, this person is a transsexual. They were born with this type of body, but they truly feel as if they are this. And that's where those lines, those amalgams kind of come out, and we're like, well, how do we deal with the person in that situation? You deal with whatever that person presents to you. You don't make the assumption that you know better because that guy's it's a dude dressed up as a... Doesn't matter. If they're presenting to you as a female, then you treat them as such, right? If they're presenting to you as a male, you treat them as such, okay? But it's important not to put your cultural beliefs upon that person. You can express your opinion, absolutely, but don't assume just because you call a Coke that they also call a Coke a Coke. They may be pot people. They may be soft drink people. You just never know. Some of the things that we naturally assume are genetically driven in our culture actually, or some of the things that we assume are driven by behaviors, things that we learn, are actually, through research, being proven to be actually genetically driven. So as we learn more and more about how the human has evolved and how we have come to be the people we are today and where we're going in the future, we're going to begin to peel away some of those layers and really begin to decipher what is genetically driven and what is culturally driven. Okay? So when your grandmother gave your culture to your mother, and when your mother gave your culture to you, and when you pass your culture on to your children or future children, that's called inculturation. Meaning 1, 2, 3, however far down. And at some point, you get to change a portion of that. Like, your dad may have been really into, like Westerns, and that was their thing. But you really, really kind of prefer sci-fi, and so you pass along the sci-fi thing to your kids. But the love of movies is still there. Okay? One of the things that we do when we do that inculturation is we create this superiority of our ethnic identity. And that's called ethnocentrism. There's nothing wrong with being proud of your culture. We encourage that. We want you to be proud of who you are and proud of what your people have done. But it's not okay to think that yours is the best. And I even catch myself sometimes going, well, I can't believe that. Well, it's not what I believe. It's my perceived truth versus their perceived truth. So somewhere in the middle is the actual truth. So we have to guard ourselves as interpersonal communicators to take off those blinders that we've put on about our own culture and somehow begin to navigate between listening to that person and really beginning to be that person who can ask the questions, in a meaningful manner and begin to understand why that person believes what they do. I have a colleague that I work with at Amarillo College who had, in previous job experiences, worked with students learning English. And she was particularly working with students from a lot of the Laotian countries. And those students would take on personas. They would go to their temple and worship, but then they would go to the Baptist church on Sundays. And she began to ask them about that. And one of the women looked at her and said, "Do you know the reason that you are a Christian?" And she's like, "Well, no." She's like, "Because your grandmother was a Christian." There we go with that enculturation. But shame on us for putting the blinders on to assume that because you're one way or the other, you're wrong. Because you're not like me, you must be wrong. I love the idea of the Olympics this time of year because we're exposed to so many different cultures. I don't know if y'all saw the clip today of the cross-country skier from Russia who broke his ski, and he's just trying to finish is really what was happening. And he fell down one last time, and his ski was just obliterated. I mean, there's no way he could have continued. Into the picture, here comes this guy carrying a ski. It's not the Russian coach. It's a Canadian coach who wants him to finish. That's a cultural thing. Where was the Russian coach? Somebody posted that on, the links underneath. They're like, where was the Russian coach? I don't know. But I'm glad that someone took the effort to go and be the extra mile for that person. Okay? So on page 34 of your textbook, you're going to see this survey. I want you to go ahead and take that survey. I think it's going to come to play while we have further conversations about this. But it's a cultural orientation. It should take you about 5 minutes to answer the questions. But go ahead and talk about it. We'll go ahead and talk about it when we meet next week. But so pause right here. No, really, pause it. Seriously, pause it. Pause. All right. So you've paused and you've restarted. So good job. Hope you've learned some things about yourself. Maybe had a chance to answer some questions that you hadn't thought about. So we're going to kind of delve into this a little bit. We're not going to get really into it because this is already 17 minutes long and I have no idea how my bandwidth is going to establish this. But one of the things that it talks about in there is the individualist culture, and I think this is really important to us because it talks about how we perceive how we get things done. And there are a lot of Americans who believe in the bootstrap theory. Pull yourself up and go. I believe in that. I'll be the first to admit it. I believe that. I believe that I'm in control of my life. I am the one who has power over my life. And if I want it to be a different way, then it's up to me to make that change. Well, but a collectivist culture, someone who believes that the group moves forward and gets things done, that the group has better ideas, would completely disagree. So individualist cultures, as is given examples in your book, United States, United Kingdom, Australia, the Netherlands, all of those countries are very strong individualist countries, meaning get out of my way, I've got a job to do, and I'm going to go do my job. You can do whatever you want, no judgment against you, but this is what I'm going to do. Whereas these collectivist cultures very much believe in conformity and tradition. So just some few examples: Guatemala, Ecuador, Panama, Venezuela, China. They follow the rules. They're very willing to go above and beyond to make sure that they don't embarrass anyone. Okay? So that also brings us to the high context and low context cultures. So in a high context culture, you're kind of expected to know the hidden message, meaning there are opportunities where you should know what's going on so that you don't ask someone something that you know if you know, is offensive or might embarrass someone. To better understand that, let's take the contrast and look at the low context culture. Here in America, we have a really big thing about being right. We enjoy being right. We like proving our point. And it's even encouraged in the college classroom, as pointed out by your text. I expect you guys, and I think I told you this the first time in class, I expect you to go, now let me make sure I get this straight. You want me to and come back at me with these ideas, your own ideas, and then we can begin to navigate those ideas together. That's beautiful. That's exactly what I want. Unless you're in one of the high context cultures, that's rude to them. It is inconsiderate. It is embarrassing. It is like a faux pas of all faux pas. You don't do that in a high context culture because you're expected to maintain the status quo. There are very rigid rules about this person is up here and I am down here and I must not raise above that person. My job is to be down here. Okay? One of the things your textbook pointed out, in India, that actually happens with how you marry. You are only supposed to marry in your class, meaning if you only have this much money, you better not be marrying up here. So it's a caste system. There's even some countries, I believe they cited the Netherlands, where you need to marry according to your looks. If you're dog ugly, you better be marrying somebody that's dog ugly. If you're phenomenal looking, only a phenomenal looking mate will work for you. So it always kind of ebbs and flows. But if you don't understand that even exists, you begin to see how those intercultural communications can get really screwed up in a hurry. So just with those two examples, individualist and collectivist cultures, okay, individualist versus collectivist, all right, and high context superiors. My job is to be down here if I'm not the superior, versus the low context where, like the American college classroom, where you're encouraged to talk back, to have your own ideas. If you just even put those two contrasting elements together, you can begin to see how this cultural communication can go very awry. All right. So I want to talk to you a little bit about the assignments that you're going to be doing this week. And I'm going to I'm going to stop this video, and I'm going to encourage you to go to the next video so that it might be a little bit shorter. It might not take your computer as long to load it. But just know that you need to keep going down the blog so that you get all the information. All right? I'll talk to you in a minute.